to introduce to you our next speaker, which is Pim Van Lommel. He's come all the way from Amsterdam for this, so I'm very excited to hear his presentation. I'm sure he can tell you a little bit about his own background, but what I do know is he's a cardiologist, and he has studied in quite some depth near-death experience with survivors of cardiac arrest. And he's also published many articles. Really looking forward to finding out what he's discovered in his research and what we can learn from it. And I'm very excited to have you here, so welcome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased that I get the opportunity to discuss here today my concept of non-local consciousness based on scientific research on near-death experiences in survivors of cardiac arrest. And near-death experience, or an NDE as we heard this morning already, or an experience of enhanced consciousness during a period of apparent coma, still give rise to many unbelieving and critical questions, especially by physicians and neuroscientists. But as already 1 century ago William James has said, to study the abnormal is the best way of understanding the normal. How can it scientifically be explained that people can have clear memories from a period of obvious unconsciousness? Or how is it possible that permanent life changes occur after cardiac arrest of only 2 minutes? And NDE is the unforgettable confrontation with the unlimited dimensions of our consciousness. And as one not has experienced an NDE himself, it seems impossible to really understand the impact and the life-changing after effects of this overwhelming experience. The existing worldview has radically changed. Quote, "It felt as if I had become another person, but with the same identity." And another quote, "You can be physically dead, but your mind lives on. Only one thing matters, your attitude towards other people. I accept life as it is, and I'm no longer afraid of death." I will not only discuss or talk about changes in consciousness during or after an NDE, but above all I want to discuss my ideas about the relationship between consciousness and the brain. Important questions for me were, how is consciousness related to the integrity of brain function? Is it possible to gain insight in this relationship? And is there a biological basis of consciousness anyway? We can distinguish between both temporary and timeless aspects of consciousness. And this prompts the following question: is it possible to speak of a beginning of our consciousness, and will our consciousness ever end? I realize that my approach will be new or unexpected for most neuroscientists, and that my conclusions will not always be in conformity with the currently widely accepted materialistic paradigm of Western science. I also realize that many of aspects of consciousness are still a great mystery. How started my interest in near-death experiences? In 1969, during my rotating internship, a patient was successfully resuscitated in the coronary care unit by electrical defibrillation. And in those days, this was all new and exciting for us. We mostly do not realize anymore that until 1967, less than 50 years ago, all patients with cardiac arrest died because modern resuscitation techniques like defibrillation and external chest compressions were not yet available. But this patient regained consciousness after a period of unconsciousness of about 4 minutes. And we as a resuscitation team were of course very happy. It was all new for us. But the patient seemed to be very, very disappointed. He told me about going through a tunnel, seeing a light, and heard also beautiful music. I have never forgotten this event, but I did not do anything with it. And at that time I did not know that in human history the same experience have been told in many cultures and many religions and at all times, as shown in this painting from the Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch. This painting is from 1480, showing deceased people escorted through a tunnel to the light. And only years later, in 1975, Raymond Bowie was here, first described the so-called near-death experiences. But only in 1986, I read about these experiences in the book by George Ritchie entitled Return from Tomorrow, which relates what he experienced during the period of clinical death of 9 minutes duration in 1943 as a medical student. And after reading this book, I started to interview my patients who had survived the cardiac arrest in the past. And to my great surprise, within 2 years, 12 out of 50 patients, survivors of cardiac arrest in the past, told me about their NDE. For me, it all started with scientific curiosity, because according to our current medical concepts, it is impossible to experience consciousness during cardiac arrest when circulation and breathing have ceased. I grew up in an academic environment in which I had been taught that it was obvious that consciousness was the product of a functioning brain. And up until that point, I had always accepted this as true. But now the phenomenon of near-death experience raised a number of fundamental questions. How and why does an NDE occur? How does the content of an NDE come about? Why does a person's life change so radically after an NDE? I was unable to accept most of the answers to these questions because they seemed incomplete, incorrect, or unfounded. Now first, what is a near-death experience? Some people who have survived a life-threatening crisis report an extraordinary conscious experience. And it can be defined as the reported memory of a range of impressions during such a special state of consciousness, including a number of universal elements, as we heard this morning as well. And NDE's transformation, always causing enhanced intuitive sensitivity, profound changes in life inside, and a loss of the fear of death. And this is why these kind of experiences are also called spiritual transformative experience, or STE. And near-death experiences occur with increasing frequency because of improved survival rates resulting from modern techniques of resuscitation and from better treatment for patients in coma. The content of an NDE and the effects on patients seem similar worldwide across all cultures and all times. However, the subjective nature and the absence of a frame of reference for this experience lead to individual, cultural and religious factors determining the vocabulary used to describe and interpret these experiences. Children and adults, Christians and atheists, Muslims and Buddhists, they all use different words from their own religion, culture and tradition. The experience is inevitable. And according to a recent and random poll in Germany and the USA, about 4% of the total population in the Western world should have experienced an NDE. So more than 10 million people in the United States, about 2.5 million people in Italy, and about 20 million people in Europe must have had an NDE. Now, why do we physicians hardly ever hear a patient tell about his NDE? Patients are so reluctant to share their experience with others by all the negative responses they get. Patients must feel that you trust them and that you can listen without any comment or prejudice. But for most physicians, the NDE is still an incomprehensible and unknown phenomenon. Once a conference was held about NDE in the University Hospital with more than 300 people in attendance. And at the end of the conference, after several lectures about NDE and lectures from people with an NDE, a man stood up and said, "I I'm a cardiologist for more than 25 years, and I've never heard such absurd stories. This is total nonsense. I don't believe one word of it. Then another man stood up in the office and said, I'm one of your patients. I have had an NDE during cardiac arrest, and you would be the last one I would ever tell. They feel that this kind of physicians are not able to listen at all. They know it, so they keep silent. Until recently, there was no prospective scientific design study to explain the cause and content of an NDE. Also, this had to be retrospective, and very selective with respect to patients. And based on this retrospective studies, some believed that experience could be caused by physiological changes in the brain as a result of lack of oxygen, cerebral anoxia. Other theories encompass the psychological reaction to approaching death, hallucinations, dreams, side effect of drugs, or just false memories. So in 1988, we started a prospective study of 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals, with the aim to investigate the frequency, the cause and content of an NDE. And this cartoon was published in a Dutch national newspaper when our study was published in the Lancet in December 2001. We wanted to know if there could be physiological, pharmacological, psychological, or demographic explanation why people experience enhanced consciousness during cardiac arrest. And we did a short, standardized interview with sufficiently recovered patients within a few days of resuscitation, and asked whether they could remember the period of unconsciousness and what they recalled. We additionally performed a longitudinal study with taped interviews of all late survivors of cardiac arrest with an NDE, 2 and 8 years following cardiac arrest, or with a matched control group of survivors of cardiac arrest who did not report an NDE. Now, we studied patients who survived a cardiac arrest because this is a well-described, life-threatening medical situation, which is also called clinical death. And the definition of clinical death was used for the period of unconsciousness caused by the lack of oxygen or anoxia of the brain due to the arrest of circulation and breathing that happens during cardiac arrest in patients with an acute myocardial infarction. And these patients will ultimately die from irreversible damage to the brain if cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, is not initiated within 5 to 10 minutes. It is the closest model of the process of dying. Now, in cases where memories were reported, we coded the experience according to a weighted core experience index. And in this system, the depth of the NDE was measured according to the reported elements of the content of the NDE. And the more elements were reported, the deeper the experience was and the higher the resulting score was. So we found that 282 patients, 82%, had no recollection of the period of cardiac arrest of the period of unconsciousness. However, 62 patients, 18%, reported some recollection at the time of clinical death. And of these patients, 12% had a core experience with a score of 6 or higher, and 6% had a superficial NDE. Now, which elements were reported? In our study, about 50% of the patients with an NDE reported awareness of being dead or had positive emotions. About 25% of the patients had an out-of-body experience. 30% reported moving through a tunnel. About 25% had communication with the light of observed cause. About 30% of the patients had an observation of the celestial landscape or had a meeting with deceased relatives. 30% experienced a life review and 8% experienced a boredom. So in our study, all well-known elements were reported except the fighting NDE, which I know personally patients who had the fighting NDE, which is rise quite separate. Now, what might distinguish the small percentage of patients who report an NDE from those who do not. We found to our surprise that neither the duration of cardiac arrest, 2 minutes or 8 minutes, nor the duration of unconsciousness, 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, nor the need for intubation and complicated CPR, nor induced cardiac arrest and electrophysiological stimulation, EPS, which also do 20 to 30 seconds, and the car cath had any influence on the frequency of NDE, and that's not significant. So the degree or gravity of the lack of oxygen in the brain and oxygen appeared to be irrelevant. So a physiological explanation for NDE like anoxia could be excluded. Neither would we find any relationship between the frequency of NDE and administered drugs, fear of death before the arrest, psychological explanation, nor foreknowledge of NDE, that you know that these kind of experiences are possible, gender, religion, nor education. So if you were Christian or atheist, it didn't matter at all. Now, the longitudinal study. In addition to the longitudinal study, like I said, with interviews 2 and 8 years following the cardiac arrest, the study was designed whether to assess whether the loss of the fear of death, the transformation in attitude toward life, and the enhanced intuitive sensitivity is the result of having an NDE, or just the result of cardiac arrest itself. This has never been studied before. The NDE turned out to be a life-changing experience because only the patient with an NDE did show this aforementioned typical transformation. In particular, they were less afraid of death and had a stronger belief in an afterlife. We saw in them a greater interest in spirituality and questions about the purpose of life, as well as a greater acceptance of and love for oneself and others. The conversations we had in our longitudinal study also revealed that people, often to their own amazement and confusion, had acquired enhanced intuitive feelings after an NDE, or as many of them put it, they had acquired paranormal gifts. This enhanced intuition is based on the interconnectedness with the non-local consciousness of others, and is independent of time, in a knowing of future events or having prognostic dreams. And is independent of distance, the sense of knowing about incoming phone call and of pain, illness, or upcoming death of people which usually proves to be accurate. The similar occurrence of this enhanced intuition can be quite problematic, as people suddenly have a very acute sense of others, which can be extremely intimidating. As someone told me, I couldn't even talk about it, or I would have been committed to an institution. And I know patients when we put it in an institution because they were still talking about this kind of experiences. But finally, it's quite remarkable and a surprising and unexpected finding to see a cardiac arrest lasting a few minutes give rise to such a lifelong process of transformation. However, the integration and acceptance of an NDE is a process that may take many years because of a far-reaching impact on people's pre-NDE understanding of life and value system. Despite the most positive experience, the NDE is also a traumatic event because there is hardly any acceptance by doctors, nurses, family and partner with a divorce rate of more than 70%. It's not the same person as I married before. Which makes the process of acceptance and integration very difficult. And this process will take many, many years with strong feelings of depression, homesickness, and loneliness. But the longer the interval between NDE and interview, the more positive changes are usually reported. Now, several theories have been proposed to explain the NDE. However, in our first prospective study ever, it could not be shown that psychological, pharmacological, or physiological factors cause these experiences during cardiac arrest. So with a purely physiological explanation, such as lack of oxygen in the brain. Most patients who had been clinical death should report an NDE because all patients in our study had been unconscious because of lack of oxygen in the brain, resulting from the cardiac arrest. However, only 80% reported an NDE. And while only 80% reported an NDE after cardiac arrest is still a big mystery. Besides, it's a well-established fact that people without any lack of oxygen in the brain, like in depression or meditation, can also experience an enhanced consciousness. Another theory holds that NDE might be a changing state of consciousness, or the theory of continuity, in which memories, identity and cognition with emotion function independently from the unconscious body and retain the possibility of extrasensory perception. Obviously, during NDE, enhanced consciousness is experienced independently from the normal bodily waking consciousness. In 4 prospective studies with identical study design, our drug study, we only studied with a statistical analysis, 1 study from the USA and 2 studies from the UK, about the same percentage of NDE was found in a total of 562 survivors of cardiac arrest. And all the authors write in their comment that no one physiological or psychological model by itself could explain all the common features of the NDE. Bruce Grayson writes in his comment that the paradoxical occurrence of heightened, lucid awareness and logical thought process during a period of impaired cerebral perfusion raises particular perplexing questions for a current understanding of consciousness and its relation to brain function. A clear sensory and complex perceptual processes during a period of apparent clinical death challenge the concept that consciousness is localized exclusively in the brain. As Sampari and Peter Fennick write that the data from several NDE studies suggest that the NDE arises during unconsciousness. And this is a surprising conclusion, they write, because when the brain is so dysfunctional that the patient is deeply comatose, those cerebral structures which underpin subjective experience and memory must be severely impaired. Complex experience such as reported NDE should not arise or be retained in memory. Such patients would be expected to have no subjective experience at all. A Pensatori from the other British study concludes that according to mainstream science, it is quite impossible to find a scientific explanation for the NDE as long as we believe that consciousness is only a side effect of a functioning brain. The fact that people report lucid experiences in their consciousness when the brain activity has ceased is, in her view, difficult to reconcile with current medical opinion. So with lack of evidence for any other theories for NDE, the concept this far assumed, but never scientifically proven, that consciousness and memories are produced by large groups of neurons and are localized in the brain should be discussed. How to clear consciousness outside one's body be experienced at the moment that the brain no longer functions during a period of clinical death, even with a flatline EEG. Furthermore, even blind people have described veridical perception during out-of-body experience at the time of their NDE. Scientific study of NDE pushes us to the limits of our medical and neurophysiological ideas about the range of human consciousness and about the mind-brain relationship. Before I discuss in greater detail some neurophysiological aspects of normal brain function and during cardiac arrest, I would like to reconsider certain elements of the NDE. First, the out-of-body experience. In this experience, people have veridical perceptions from a position outside and above their lifeless body. NDEs have the feeling that they have apparently taken off the body like an old coat, and to their surprise, They appear to have retained their own identity with the possibility of perception, emotions, and a very clear consciousness. And this out-of-body experience is scientifically important because doctors, nurses, and relatives can verify the reported perceptions. And they can also corroborate the precise moment the NDE with OB occurred during the period of CPR. In a recent review of about 100 corroborated reports of potentially verifiable out-of-body perception during NDE, Jan Holden has found that about 90% were completely accurate. 8% contained only some minor error, and only 2% was completely erroneous. This proves that an OB cannot be an hallucination, because this means experience and perception that has no basis in reality, like in psychosis. Neither it can be a delusion, which is an incorrect assessment of a correct perception, nor is it an illusion, which means a misapprehensive or misleading image. Moreover, you need a functioning brain to have an hallucination, delusion, or illusion. This real OB can be shown in this drawing of a 6-year-old girl who nearly drowned and was resuscitated in a hospital in the USA. In this drawing you see a happy and smiling girl up here watching her own resuscitation with details like external chest compression. A girl of 6-year-old doesn't know these kind of details of a resuscitation. And this is the report of a nurse of a coronary care unit. During night shift, an ambulance brings in a 44-year-old, cyanotic, comatose man into the coronary care unit. He was found in a coma about 30 minutes before in battle. When we go to intubate the patient, he turned out to have dentures in his mouth. I removed these upper dentures and put them onto the crash cart. Only after about an hour and a half, the patient has sufficient heart rhythm and blood pressure, but he is still ventilated and intubated, and he is still comatose. He is transferred to the intensive care unit to continue the necessary artificial respiration for 1 week. And after more than 1 week in coma, do I meet again with the patient who is by now back on the cardiac ward. The moment he sees me, he said, "Oh yes, you know where my dentures are." I'm very, very surprised. Then the patient elucidates, "Yes, you were there when I was brought into the hospital. And you took my dentures out of my mouth and put them onto that cart. It had all these bottles on it, and there was this sliding drawer underneath. There you put my teeth." I was especially amazed because I remember this happening while the man was in deep coma and in the process of CPR. It appeared that the man had seen himself lying in bed, that he had perceived himself from above, how nurses and doctors had been listening with the CPR. He was also able to describe correctly and in detail the small room in which he has been resuscitated, where he was admitted in coma and had left coma, as well as the appearances of those present, like myself. And then the holographic life review. During his life review, the subject feels the presence and renewed experience, not only of every act, but also of every thought from one's past life. And one realizes that all of this is an energy field which influences oneself as well as others. All that has been done and thought seems to be significant and stored, because one is connected with the memories, emotions, and consciousness of other persons. You experience the consequences of your own thoughts, words, and actions to that other person in the very moment in the past that it occurred. Interconnectedness. Patients survey their whole life in one glance. Time and space do not seem to exist during such an experience. Non-locality. Quote, "All of my life up till the present seems to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic, three-dimensional review, and each event seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness of good or evil, or with an insight into cause and effect. Not only did I perceive everything from my own viewpoint, but I also knew the thoughts of everyone involved in the event, as if I had their thoughts within me. This meant that I perceived not only what I had done or thought, but even in what way it had influenced others, as if I saw things with all-seeing eyes. As if even your thoughts are apparently not wiped out. I always say, consider the impact of this statement for a moment. Your thoughts are never wiped out. And all the time during the review, the importance of love was emphasized. Looking back, I cannot say how long this live review and live insight lasted. It may have been long, for every subject came up, but at the same time it seemed like just a fraction of a second, because I perceived it all at the same moment. Time and distance seemed not to exist. I was in all places at the same time, and sometimes my attention was drawn from something, and then I would be present there. Then a preview or flash forward can be experienced, and people feel like they can see a part of their life that is yet to come. And again it seems that if time and space do not exist during this preview, non-locality. Quote, and in a flash I saw the rest of my life. I could see a large part of their future life, taking care of her children, my wife's illness, everything that would happen to me, both in and out of the workplace. I could see it all. I foresaw my wife's death and my mother's passing. One day I wrote down all the things I saw back then, and over the years I've been able to tick them all off. For instance, I saw my wife on her deathbed, wrapped in a white shawl, just like the one she was given by a friend of hers some days before she died. And it's also possible to come in contact with the consciousness of deceased persons, also interconnected. Quote, during my cardiac arrest, I had an extensive experience, and later I saw, apart from my deceased grandmother, a man who looked at me lovingly, but whom I did not know. More than 10 years later, at my mother's deathbed, she confessed to me that I had been born out of an extramarital relationship. My father being a Jewish man who had been reported and killed during the Second World War, and my mother showed me his picture. The unknown man that had been seen rather 10 years before during my NDE turned out to be my biological father. Some patients can describe how they return into the body, mostly to the top of the head, after they had come to understand that it wasn't yet time yet, or that they still had a task to fulfill. The conscious return to the body is experiencing something very oppressive. They regain consciousness in their body and realize that they are locked up again in their damaged body, meaning again all the pain and restriction from their disease. Quote, when it came to me in my body, it was dreadful, so dreadful. The experience had been so beautiful that I didn't want to come back. I wanted to stay there, and yet I came back. From that moment, it was a real struggle to live my life inside my body with all the limitations I experienced at the time. But later I realized that this experience was, in fact, a blessing. For now I know that the mind and body are separate, and that there is life after death. And about all the people who have experienced an NDE lose the fear of death. Quote, it is outside my domain to discuss something that can only be proven by death. For me, however, this blessing experience was decisive in convincing me that consciousness lives on beyond the grave, and I know now for sure that body and mind are separated. Death was not death, but another form of life. So we have to come to the surprising conclusion that in our study during cardiac arrest, all these reported elements of an NDE were experienced during transient functional loss of all functions of the cortex and the brain center in the flatline EEG. But how do we know that the EEG is flat in those patients with cardiac arrest? How can we study this? Through many studies with induced cardiac arrest in both human and animal models, cerebral function has been shown to be severely compromised during cardiac arrest, with complete cessation of cerebral flow within seconds, causing the clinical findings of the sudden loss of consciousness, the loss of breathing, apnea, the loss of all body reflexes, the cortex, and also the loss of all brain stem reflexes, like the gag reflex, the corneal reflex, and fixed and dilated pupils. The electrical activity in the cerebral cortex, but also in the deeper structures of the brain in animals, has been shown to be absent after 10 to 20 seconds of flatline EEG. And in the acute myocardial infarction, the duration of cardiac arrest is always longer than 20 seconds. It takes much more time to initiate a CPR successfully. So all 562 survivors of cardiac arrest in the 4 prospective studies must have had a flatline EEG. It's extremely rare that the simultaneous registration of electrical activity of the heart, ECG, and of the cortex of the brain, EEG, during cardiac arrest could be monitored. But such simultaneous registration of ECG and EEG is shown here. The patient was referred because of sudden periods of unconsciousness. And during this registration, which is in total 60 seconds each, strict is 10 seconds up here, the sudden systole cardiac arrest occurs up here. And after about 10 seconds, the EEG changes dramatically. And after 18 seconds, the EEG has become a flatline. Okay. So you have a flatline ECG and a flatline EEG. In this patient, it was 18 seconds. And then, after about 30 seconds of asystole, there is a short ventricular tachycardia, and then heart rhythm comes back, and EEG comes also back. In case of cardiac arrest for 37 seconds, it takes more time to get the EEG activity back as well. The conclusion about conscious experience during a flatline ECG is often called impossible and unscientific. We quite often propose objection that the flatline EEG doesn't rule out any brain activity because it is mainly registration of the electrical activity of the cerebral cortex, misses the mark. The issue is not whether there is any brain activity of any kind whatsoever, but whether there is the measurable brain activity of the specific form regarded by our contemporary neuroscience as a necessary condition of conscious experience with visible activities in many neural centers, the so-called global neural workspace. And it has been proven that there is no such specific brain activity at all during cardiac arrest. So it is indeed a scientific challenge to discuss new hypotheses that could explain the possibility to have a clear and enhanced consciousness during changing period of a non-functional brain with memories, with self-identity, with cognition, with emotion, with the possibility of perception out and above the lifeless body, to explain the important interconnectedness with the consciousness of other peoples in the past and of deceased relatives, to explain the possibility of experience instantaneously and simultaneously non-locality, a review or a preview of someone's life in a dimension without a conventional body-linked concept of time and space, where all past, present and future events exist, and even to explain the experience of the conscious return into the body. In my recently released book, Conscious Beyond Life, it was a bestseller with more than 250,000 copies sold worldwide. I've written that based on prospective studies on NDE, based on recent findings in neurophysiological research, and based on concepts of quantum physics, our consciousness cannot be localized in a certain time nor space. This is called non-local consciousness, beyond time and space. And in this concept, our endless or non-local consciousness with declarative memories finds its origin in and is stored in a non-local reality as a wave pools of information. And the brain only serves as a relay station for parts of these wavefields of consciousness to be received in 2 or our waking consciousness. The function of the brain should so be compared with a transceiver, a transmitter, receiver, or interface, exactly as the like the function of a computer. Different neuronal networks function as interface for different aspects of our consciousness, and the function of neuronal networks should be regarded as receivers and conveyors, not as retainers of consciousness and memories. This concept, non-local consciousness, is not rooted in the measurable domain of physics, our manifest world. However, the physical aspects of consciousness, which originates from the wave aspects of consciousness through collapse of the wave function, objective reduction, can be measured by means of neuroimaging techniques like fMRI, PET scan, or EEG. With this concept of non-local consciousness, all the important elements of an NDE myocardial arrest could be explained. Now, in trying to understand this concept of interaction between non-local consciousness and the material body, it seems appropriate to compare it with modern worldwide communication. There's a continuous exchange of objective information by means of electromagnetic fields for radio, television, mobile telephone, or laptop computer. At this very moment, we are availing for hundreds of thousands of telephone calls and hundreds of television and radio programs. But we become only aware of this electromagnetic informative fields at a moment. We use our mobile telephone or by switching on our radio, television, or computer. And what we receive is neither inside the instrument, not in the components, but thanks to the receiver, the information from the electromagnetic fields, the cloud, becomes observable to our senses, and hence perception occurs in our consciousness. Internet with more than 1 billion websites can be received at about the same time in the USA, in Europe, and in Australia, and it is obviously not located inside our network, nor is it produced by it. Information from internet is always and everywhere available because it is stored in the iCloud. This concept can be compared with non-local consciousness, which is always there inside and outside our body. Now we can conclude that our waking consciousness, or ego, which we experience as our daily consciousness, is only a part of our whole and endless non-local consciousness, which also can be called universal, cosmic, or divine consciousness. The view of the non-local consciousness allows us to understand the wide variety of special states of consciousness, such as can be experienced during a critical medical situation and near-death experience, or during an acute situation of apparently unavoidable death in an imminent traffic accident and fear-death experience. And these experiences are also reported during meditation or deep relaxation, also called mystical, religious, or enlightened experiences, during changing states of consciousness during regression therapy, hypnosis, hypnagogia, severe depression, isolation, or the use of drugs like LSD or DMT or ayahuasca. These experiences of enhanced consciousness may also occur during the terminal phase of life, the death vision or end-of-life experience. During the end of life, people sometimes report encounters with deceased rock dogs who welcome them, the sight of a beautiful unearthly environment and a bright light, or a sense of unconditional love. The content of such deathbed visions can be a striking resemblance to an NDE. Like an NDE, the deathbed vision takes away the fear of death. Unfortunately, many accounts of deathbed visions are either not recognized as such or are interpreted as hallucinations, terminal confusion, or as side effects of medication. And a shared death experience, or empathetic NDE. This experience is caused by the strong emotions felt upon the death of a dearly loved person. A healthy and empathetic person may share, as it were, in the death experience of another person who is dying or has just died. And then they are suddenly back in their body and back at the bedside of the deceased relative. The content of this shared death experience may be identical to the classic near-death experience. And interconnectedness with non-local aspects of consciousness also explain apparitions of the moment of death, like being in contact with non-local aspects of the consciousness of a dying person in a distance, the so-called pre-mortal experience. When they receive information about the moment of death, or even sometimes about how and where they died. This information could not be known at that moment. Mostly these pre-mortal experiences occur at night, during sleep, but these experiences are far more clear than just a dream. And also the so-called post-mortal experience, or after-death communication, or ADC. That is the inner feeling of knowing to be in contact with the consciousness of a deceased person. It is still a big taboo to talk about the sensation of being in contact with a deceased loved one during the weeks, months, or years after his or her death. This contact can consist of seeing, sensing a presence, feeling touched, or seeing the deceased person, and is sometimes accompanied by communication, certain fragrances, or unexpected chance incidents that are intuitively linked with the dead person. People share this experience only when they feel a great deal of trust and know that they will not be at the receiving end of prejudice or negative comments, like it's just wishful thinking, or it's just your brief talk. These experiences are also mostly occur during sleep, and this is why they are usually called just a dream. Post-mortal experiences, or ADC, are still a huge taboo in the Western world, despite the fact that about 125 million people in Europe and more than 100 million people in the USA must have had this after-death communication. The fact that contact is possible with the consciousness of the deceased relative is usually very comforting and helpful in a period of mourning, and healthcare workers or family members should not call an ADC an hallucination. The result of an ADC that is usually the fear of the own death will disappear as well. Now, the interconnectedness with this informative field of non-local consciousness also explain enhanced intuition, like clairvoyance, prognostic dreams, and visions, the non-local information exchange. As I told before, following an NDE, most people, often to their own amazement and confusion, may experience such an enhanced intuitive sensitivity, which means having access to non-local information that is not received by our senses nor by our body. Presumably, the functional receiving capacity of the body and brain is permanently enhanced following an NDE, which can be compared with radio receiving not only channel 1, your own consciousness, but at the same time channel 2, 3, 4, and 5, the fields of consciousness of others. William James has called this a lower personal threshold of consciousness. This remote local communication or entanglement seems also to be demonstrated in remote viewing, non-local perception, and in the effect of consciousness on matter, like a non-local perturbation, as seen in neuroplasticity, where in EEG, fMRI, and PET scan studies, functional and structural changes in the brain are demonstrated following change of consciousness, like in meditation, mindfulness training, or placebo treatment of patients with depression, chronic pain, or with Parkinson's disease, which obviously leads us only one conclusion: it is mind over matter. Since publication of several prospective studies on NDE survivors of cardiac strikingly similar results and conclusions, the phenomenon of NDE can no longer be scientifically ignored. It is an authentic experience which cannot be simply reduced to imagination, fear of death, hallucination, psychosis, the use of drugs, or oxygen deficiency, where people appear to be permanently changed by an NDE during cardiac arrest only some minutes duration. According to these studies, the current materialistic view of the relationship between the brain and consciousness held by most physicians, philosophers, and psychologists is too restricted for a proper understanding of this phenomenon. Materialistic science starts principally from a reality that is only based on physical, observable data. But we should be aware that besides external and so-called objective perception and observation, there are also subjective, not observable and not emotional aspects like thoughts, feelings, inspiration, and intuition. We can only measure the electrical, magnetic, chemical activities in the brain by EEG, MEG, and PET scan. And we can measure change in blood flow in the brain by fMRI. But these are only neural correlates of consciousness. These measurements do not explain anything about the production nor about the content of consciousness. With our currently available scientific and objective techniques, one is not able to even prove, measure, nor objectify the content of the subjective experiences in our consciousness. Direct proof about how neurons or neuronal networks could possibly produce the subjective essence of our thoughts and feelings is totally missing. By making a scientific case for consciousness as a non-local and thus ubiquitous phenomenon, this view can contribute to new ideas about the relationship between consciousness and the brain. Research on NDE questions the purely materialistic paradigm in science, and so it seems to be important for our scientific ideas about the mind-brain and mind-body relationship. It's also evident that it is important for our concepts about life and death because of the almost unavoidable conclusion that at the time of physical death, consciousness will continue to be experienced in another dimension in which past, present, and future is enclosed. Quote, death is only the end of our physical aspects. I believe now that death, like birth, may be mere passing from one state of consciousness into another. However, we should acknowledge that research of NDE cannot give us the irrefutable scientific proof to this conclusion, because people with NDE did not quite die. But they all were very close to death and without a functioning brain. So it has indeed been scientifically proven that during NDE, enhanced consciousness was experienced independently of a functioning brain. And quoting from a recent death announcement, all what you have fails into decay, but what you are lives on beyond time and space. So we have a body and we are conscious. Without a body, we still can have conscious experiences. We still are conscious beings. Recently, someone with an NDE wrote to me, I can live without my body, but apparently my body cannot live without me. Based on scientific research on NDE, one cannot avoid the conclusion that endless consciousness has and always will exist independently from the body. There is no beginning, nor will there ever be an end to our consciousness. Our enhanced consciousness resides not in our brain and is not limited to our brain, because our consciousness is non-local. And our brain has a facilitating function, not a producing function to experience consciousness. Obviously, more knowledge about the results of NDE research and about the possible continuity of consciousness after death would have a significant impact on the practice of medicine, because it informs ideas about the treatment of patients in coma and in the final stage of terminal illness. It could also obviously result in difference in medical practice regarding procedures such as initiating or ending life-prolonging treatment, euthanasia, or the removal of organs for transplantation from somebody in the dying process with a beating heart in a warm body but with the diagnosis of brain death. But NDE research is not only of great practical significance for health care practitioners, but also for dying patients and their families. They all ought to be aware of the extraordinary conscious experience that may occur during a period of clinical death or coma, around the deathbed and the dying end-of-life experience, or even after death, the after-death communication. To provide NDEs with better help and support that they currently receive, all health workers and family members ought to consider the possibility of an NDE after patients are subject to life-threatening crisis like cardiac arrest or coma. And in the event of an NDE, the doctor or therapist should not reject the experience as a pathological or anomalous incident, but regard it as an existential and life-changing spiritual crisis with all the disorientation, the psychological problems such a crisis entails. In the past, a lot has been written about life and death, and also about special states of enhanced or non-local consciousness. But surprisingly, many people nowadays still have never heard about NDEs. And this is why they still believe that death is the end of our existence and the end of our consciousness. People are afraid that with death, everything comes to an end. As a young doctor, this was also my idea about death. As I told you before, I was raised in an academic world where I was taught that for every observation and reductionist and materialist, the so-called scientific explanation was obvious, which made it impossible to accept that the clear consciousness could be experienced during a period of cardiac arrest or coma, or even briefly before, during, or after death. But today, science, for me, means asking questions with an open mind. Science should be the search for explaining the mysteries, rather than stick with old concepts. And he who has never changed his mind because he could not accept the concept has rarely learned something. I can assure you that I learned quite a lot because of all those patients who were willing to share their NDE with me. And they have greatly changed my views on the meaning of life and death. People with an NDE have been my greatest teachers. My current view is now that, as I've already stated before, there are good reasons to assume that our consciousness doesn't always coincide with the functioning of our brain, and hence consciousness can sometimes be experienced separately from the body. I am aware that this concept can be little more than a stimulus for further study and debate. And above all, we should question the pluralistic paradigm in science. Remarkably, in a recent whisper representative social poll in Europe, about 55% of the population, more than 250 million people, believe in some kind of personal survival. And in the USA, the percentage is even higher. These surprising high figures are in sharp contrast with the opinion of the majority of Western scientists, who systematically ignore and ridicule the possibility of personal survival after physical death. We desperately need a real paradigm shift in science. I believe and hope that in the near future, modern science will include empirical research on unusual subjective experiences that may occur in our consciousness, and that we will accept non-local concepts to understand how we are interconnected with each other and with our endangered planet. I realize now that everything originates from consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. I now understand that people create their own subjective reality based on their consciousness and create the intention one lives his life. We should recognize that our view of the world is wrong, because we do not realize that the world as we see it only derives its subjective reality from our consciousness. Because it is only our consciousness that is determining how we perceive this world. If we are in love, the world around us is beautiful. When we are depressed, our world is like hell. And when we are frightened, we're terrified by the politicians and by the press, our world will be full of terror, as we see it now. The mind in itself, in its own place and in itself, can be a heaven or hell, wrote John Milton in 1667 in his poem, Paradise Lost. Regarding what we can learn from people who are willing to share their NDE or ADC with us, I would like to quote Doug Hammarskjöld. Our ideas about death define how we live our life. Because as long as we believe that death is the end of everything we are, we will give our energy toward the temporary and material aspects of our life. In our short-sightedness and sometimes willful ignorance, we forget to reflect on the future of our planet, where our children and grandchildren will have to live and survive. We forget about sustainability as we are now destroying and exhausting systematically our planet, just because we are living in a competitive, materialistic society. We should stop thinking and acting as we are better, that we are better than others, because this will always be at the expense of children and other weak, valued creatures around the world. We should realize that the harm we cause to each other and to nature ultimately is harming ourselves. Because we as humans are not only intensely interconnected and tangled with each other, but also with animals and plants living on our endangered earth. I hope that in the near future we will accept non-local concepts to understand how we are and always will be interconnected with each other, also after physical death. That we have to change our personal consciousness, not only to change the way we live, but also to change the way we want to treat, honor, and respect people who are willing and able to share the ME or ADC with us. Their lives changed in ways they were not prepared for. And they all tell us that they fundamentally changed the ideas about life and death, because, quote, you can be physically dead, but your mind is on. Another quote, death was not death, but another form of life. Consciousness seems to be our essence. And once we leave our body, leave our physical world, we exist as pure consciousness beyond time and space, and are unfolded in pure, unconditional love. As the woman with NDE wrote to me, when the power of love becomes stronger than our love for power, our world will change. And it will require a huge change of consciousness indeed. And we should all feel the responsibility for this change. Thank you for your attention.